Imagine a fantasy world with humans, orcs, dwarfs, elves, undead, and this guy, who is probably also a human. No, I'm not really talking about these guys. I'm talking about the world of sovereignty, Crown of Kings. I want to start off by saying that I have no problem with fantasy settings that are usually seen as somewhat generic. There are generic settings that are rather well done, especially for things like video or board games. What do we even mean when we say generic? I think that most people see the world of Tolkien before them, with the familiar races that we've seen in the books and movies. While this might be true, there is no reason to expect that any setting that is tracing the footsteps of Tolkien's fantasy realm is therefore automatically creatively bankrupt. Sovereignty has a setting that is instantly familiar to anybody that has any experience with fantasy games or books. There are humans, orcs, dwarves, elves, but everything is set in a rather unique world focused on the convoluted politics and a system of natural alliances, rivalries, and political frameworks. Sovereignty is one of those games where the lore is somewhat interesting, especially when it comes to the different factions, their motivations, and the ways in which they interact in the world. The things that are actually there are fun enough, but the lore is underdeveloped and underpresented, and much of the information that we have on the world of Sovereignty comes from the faction introductions and the campaign objective. The story is rather simple. The Valyrian Empire that was apparently in control of the entirety of the playable world is now weak and fractured. The Empire was something of a Rome in the world of Sovereignty, I guess, and the other 33 realms, yes, there are 34 factions to play, see this opportunity, and you, as the player, are coming in at that moment as the leader of one of those realms vying for power. The rest of the lore is mostly presented in-game, especially at the starting screen where you pick the realm that you will be playing. I'm obviously not going to talk about all the realms, but I'll introduce some of my personal favorites. For example, there is Kazoth, or some sort of orcish Sparta, if you want to take it like that. They are a group of very militaristic and aggressive orcs that have too much time on their hands, so they spend all their free time breeding elite orcs and just trying to come up with new ways of killing their enemies. It's probably clear that you won't have many friends as Kazoth, so warfare should be your first and foremost priority. The orcish realm of Kazoth is surrounded by many enemies, and it is a small realm. Their game isn't based around numerical superiority, but elite orcish troops. These dudes are evil, militaristic, and the game tells you that they are a faction that is hard to play due to the surrounding neighbors that are not really too fond of genocidal orcs. Kazoth is a rogue realm, so not one of the civilized nations that you can play. By the way, we'll talk about rogue realms and civilized realms and the Code of War later. Let's take Eledon as another example. They are a nation that is focused on trade, spying, and industry. The idea behind nations such as Eledon is to give the player a number of different playstyles. The Warmongers of Kazoth or the Iron Barony force you to conquer in their default campaign. Nations such as Eledon shift your focus towards diplomacy and trade. The question remains of how well that works with the current and probably final state of the game, but it is an idea that is implemented to make things seem more realistic. Not like the map painting simulators where the weakest nations turn into powerhouses stomping everything and everyone, even though Sovereignty allows that as well. The main point being made here is that Sovereignty introduces different playstyles, trying to force players into certain fixed positions which could almost be identified as role-playing options that are made somewhat mandatory in a strategy game. It's a cool idea that isn't always working perfectly, but it certainly helps with the world building. Now, it would take far too much time to list more of my favorite nations, but I'm especially fond of the Undead Palemore, the Orc Iron Barony, and Human Raven Guard. The next thing we'll be taking a look at is the actual gameplay. The game can be divided into two main parts. The first part of the game is the campaign map, somewhat similar to the maps that you spend most of your time on in the Total War series, but more akin to something you might have seen in Risk. The main part of the game is focused on this map. You deploy your troops, move them in the game world, upgrade your provinces and your realm. There are special tabs for magic, trade, diplomacy, recruitment, and deploying, as well as agent actions. Your troops are represented by circles with your faction icon. The bigger the circle, the more troops are concentrated in that area. A circle with wings, or whatever that is, represents an army that is led by a hero or general. There are unique provinces with landmarks on the map that give specific bonuses or events, although most of the provinces are without any unique properties. The number in every province represents the economic development of that specific province, as well as the number of turns you need to occupy it fully. The other icons represent special resources, forts, and unique landmarks. All units have their specific unit card, which lists stats and unique properties. Units are not representing stacks as in Heroes of Might and Magic or similar games, but every card stands for one unit. Armies can consist of one unit, with the maximum number of units in one army being 20 alongside one hero. Heroes and agents are another important part of the game. At the start of your campaign, depending on the realm that you have chosen, you will be given a fixed number of heroes and agents. This influences your playstyle greatly, since there are certain limitations to combat. Tactical combat, or combat where you actually are in control of your units, can only be accessed if the army has a hero who is leading them. Otherwise, you are stuck with the auto-resolve mechanic, which is usually something that you want to avoid if possible. Agents, on the other hand, conduct diplomacy, trade, or covert operations. A cool thing in Sovereignty is that trading, or basically any diplomacy, takes time. If you send out an agent to get a treaty or negotiate a trade deal, the game will calculate how many turns it takes him to actually go there and get back. If you have no other available agents, you won't be able to do anything that is related to trading, diplomacy, or covert operations until that agent actually returns. This is one of the ways to force you to play a certain faction the way it is represented in the lore. Militaristic factions get a lot of heroes, but don't get too many agents. Realms that rely on diplomacy and trade usually have more agents and less heroes. All of your provinces earn gold. Gold is used to recruit troops, maintain your current army, in trade, building, or upgrading your provinces. Provinces can hold a certain amount of buildings, and these usually cost gold and strategic resources. Resources are needed for recruitment and certain buildings. You will usually need some of these resources that are not immediately available, so you might find yourself trading even if you're playing the Iron Barony or Kazov. You can spend a certain percentage of your gold income to research spells, and most of the factions have a unique tree of spells that they can research or use. Some magical realms actually have campaign objectives that are based on researching and using a specific spell. The other part of the game is the tactical combat that you can access by attacking or being attacked while the army is being led by a hero. There's nothing here you really haven't seen before. It's a simple system. You deploy your troops, move them towards the enemy, and engage in melee or ranged combat. The terrain influences your troop abilities as well as the spells or abilities that your heroes bring to the table. It is somewhat of a mix between the combat scene in older Heroes of Might and Magic games and games like Battle for Vesnov. Overall, it's an okay system that is enjoyable, especially with the modifiers to terrain or forts that force you to play battles differently, or to actually engage strategic locations with armies led by heroes, while attacking other, less defended or important provinces with armies without heroes, leaving it to the auto-resolve system that comes with the game. I dislike the initial limitation to tactical battles due to the fact that you usually don't have enough heroes to lead all of your armies, but delving deeper into the game I realized that this was done for reasons that were already stated in this video, and to streamline your gameplay into a more strategic and difficult framework. The AI, be it campaign or tactical battle, isn't anything to write home about. They can be surprisingly effective in certain situations, like hanging back in a battle, enjoying the protection of their forts, while you only have like 11 turns to root them or destroy them. At other times they would just sit there and take arty fire, so it's kind of a mixed bag. I haven't seen many strategic blunders on the campaign map, but the declaration of war and army movements can be suboptimal. For example, the AI can and will attack provinces that are clearly well defended with very little troops. Overall, the tactical battles are enjoyable, and you should see them as a tool to gain a tactical advantage over the AI. Also, before I forget, because I almost had forgotten, there are civilized realms and rogue realms in the game. It basically means that civilized realms actually conduct warfare according to a code of war that was established by an in-game faction, something of an in-game papacy if you want it so. So civilized realms have to declare war and wait a turn and then invade, while rogue realms actually don't respect any of the code of war. There's nothing much to say about this either. You spend most of your time on the campaign map, and I have to say that I like it and I think it's tastefully done. It looks good, and it gives you enough information at most times. The problem I have with it though is that the political map is not permanent. You have to enable it manually every turn because it keeps disabling itself once you hit end turn. Also, in protracted wars, things can get pretty confusing. There could have been better ways to deal with this, especially with the indications of provinces being sieged down or when borders actually change. I haven't played any of the soundtrack in this video yet, so I will do it right now. You know, it's your generic fantasy soundtrack. Not great, not really terrible, not much to say about it though. The other effects are pretty bare bones, but they're not annoying, and that is the main positive thing you can say about them. Better than constant unit barks that are not interesting enough or similar stuff. Also, there are some sound mysteries. If you press escape, the game does this. Why? Well, I don't know, dramatic effect I guess. I wouldn't be making this video if I thought that this game is irredeemably bad. It is not bad, but not brilliant either. I have a soft spot for indie games, especially passion projects such as Sovereignty, but it can be fairly sad that you will have to deal with bugs and unfinished parts of the game if you actually decide to get this. I would recommend it to anybody that enjoys older games like Disciples, Heroes of Might and Magic, Majesty, and newer titles like Vesnoth or maybe Battle Brothers. No single part of Sovereignty is totally unique, but the mix is unique enough to make it an interesting title that is usually worth a playthrough or two. The thing I would advise though is to wait for a deep discount. The game is around 20 euros when it's not on sale, and I wouldn't really recommend paying more than 5 euros for the thing you're getting right now. Sadly, there won't be any more support for Sovereignty, so what you see is basically what you get. There is a forum post by the devs that explains the current situation rather well. So yeah, I guess the devs realize the state the game is in, but from their story it actually really seems like a miracle that it even got released. And I think it's still worth a play, so if you guys decide to get it, you can check it out on Steam. And I guess this was Sovereignty. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.